Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 5 of season 3 of Contact Lost, the Polish podcast about competitive Warhammer 40k scene, both in Poland and abroad. Uh, I'm Tweak, your host, and today we will focus on the more abroad part of the competitive scene, as today we want to cover the recent major tournament that took place in the UK, the Beachhead Brawl. And to talk about the event and how he managed to take the top spot, I give you Alex Harrison. Hi, Alex.
Hello, nice to meet you. Thanks for having me on.
Hi, dude. It's really cool to have you. So thank you for agreeing. So, Alex, we had a little bit of a chat before we started recording the episode, but yeah, I didn't mention this. The last that I have heard about you was the I'll call it a sad final of the LGT 2021 when you were facing Malik and his admech, and his admech basically blew you off the table turn one. Unfortunately for you, and unfortunately for us, the viewers, there was hardly anything to pick up afterwards, and the show came to an end before it even started for good.
I don't
Uh,
remember that ever happening. I don't know what you mean.
so to remind you painfully, that was at the time
Thanks.
when admech was ruling on the tables everywhere, and I think there was very little anyone could do if they didn't go first, or even if they went first, or had gone first. So what have you been up to since then? Have you been experimenting with different factions, or have you been waiting for Tau eagerly? What was that time like, and what made you eventually pick up Tau as an army?
Sure. So, since then, I have been hiding. No. Yeah, obviously that was quite a rough game. It kind of showed the state of the meta at the time, especially in the UK with the lack of large line of sight blocking terrain that you may have or may be used to in the Polish community. As far as I'm aware, you guys use a lot of WTC terrain, which is quite heavy. Um, so yeah, it was quite rough. The whole tournament was pretty much like that, i.e., who goes first wins. I had some matchups where if my games could have gone the other way. But yeah, after that, I took a little break, not necessarily because of the experience of the tournament. The tournament was great overall. It was just the meta in general. And it was coming up to Christmas as well, so I couldn't really afford all the big events that were going on. So I decided to take a little break for a couple of months and sort of wait for a new couple of codexes. Obviously, we had Chapter Approved 2022 come out, so I was waiting for that because that would affect the meta as well. Yeah, and obviously we had Thick City with the Jakari dominating for a few months as well. So it meant that I was sort of stuck with my Marines trying to deal with all this stuff, which I just felt like couldn't compete. Um, so yeah, my favorite, one of my favorite armies, which I was playing in 7th edition and a bit of 8th, was Tau. So I heard that Tau was coming out soon, so I thought I'd just wait until the new codex comes out and try again.
Okay.
So yeah.
So in the meantime, as you've mentioned, chapter approved, but also custodes, gene
Mm,
stealer cults,
yeah.
tyrannids with both their supplement and the stampede and so on.
Yeah.
So all that quite eventful, I would say. Quite a lot of stuff came out in just a couple of months. So how would you summarize the state of the meta before Beachhead Brawl? What was there anything that you were, for example, specifically dreading, or did you even get any time to play test Tau, or was it just the codex came out, I'm taking the army, whatever happens happens?
Yeah, sure. So the UK meta was quite hard to tell at that time because we had the LVO, which we saw a few top UK players go across, such as Manichima, Malik, David Gaylard, Alex Petford, and they were pretty much using the same thing, Stampede, or obviously you had the rack carpet, which was quite specific. But yeah, our meta, I don't know. We kind of guessed what it would be, me and my friends that I playtest with, that it would be roughly Stampede, Custodes, Jakari, etc. So in terms of what I was expecting, I couldn't tell you list wise, but I knew roughly what I would see at the top tables, which would be those three. In terms of the codex and the information I had, obviously a lot of leaks were going around, a lot of rumors, a bit of information here and there. So I started actually practicing a few weeks prior to list submission on TTS with two of my friends, Chris and Andy Oakham. Solid players. They don't go to as many events as they'd like, but they are great to practice with. And I just tested a few ideas that I had with the information I was given online, which I know isn't great. But obviously the codex was released very close to the event itself, so I wanted to get as much practice as I could. The more information that came out, my list obviously started to change, and eventually I pretty much had a full copy on YouTube to look at a week prior to the codex coming out. So I started practicing there. And that's sort of how I came to the conclusion of my list. After losing a few games, but also winning a few games, you could start to see, right, okay, this works against this works against that. I need to play aggressive, I need to play defensive, etc., etc. And to be honest, usually I don't practice a lot before an event. But this time I thought, well, Tau isn't as simple as pick up and play. It never has been. It will require a few games, especially against the top tier lists, which are potentially pick up and play, like Custodes. So yeah, that's sort of what I was doing beforehand.
Okay, that's cool. So let's talk about the list itself. So what have you taken, and were you mastering to face, for example, I don't know, Stampede? Was there anything in the list specifically to tackle big monsters, or yeah, tell us all about it.
Sure. So I sort of split my list in half in terms of how I was going to deal with certain matchups. So on one half, I took the 6 broadsides and long strike, mostly to deal with the Stampede. And that was not something I initially was testing. I was actually only testing 3 broadsides, maybe 5, like 3 and then 1-1, and no long strike. But it wasn't until I played long strike in one game where I realized actually he is really useful to the list overall. Stampede is still tough going second as Tau if they play super aggressive, which I'll go into later. But going first, I felt like the list had to do as much damage as it could before the Stampede can start taking over the board with its super durability and speed. The same goes into Custodes. I knew Custodes are really big and everyone's taking 9 to 12 bikes. And the broadsides, I gave them velocity trackers. So that allowed them to get the +1 to hit against fly. And with their maneuverability with the advance and shoot from Montcar, it meant that I could actually get angles around some pieces of terrain, especially on objectives, etc., to make sure that all their hits, all their shots are hitting, or at least most of them, rather than just 50%. And then the other half, I felt that I needed some indirect mobility and sort of direct firepower from angles, and that's where the 2 crisis units come in with the commander. So I've got an airburst unit with 2 airbursts, fragmentation projectors, and a plasma rifle, and they also have target locks. And the reason for that is when you put the buffs that my list has on that unit, they do a ridiculous amount of damage. We were also playing raw with the Tau Sept stratagem, which affects them as well. So as soon as you cause a wound, you can basically give them +1 to wound if you do slow roll. So yeah, they also give me some indirect firepower quite a lot. They help me deal with any horde units, such as Dracari I played twice. Both had large unit of racks. Sitting behind walls, it meant obviously I'm getting max shots, so that was a real kick in the teeth for them. And the other unit had the cyclic ion, flamer, and plasma. So both units have plasma. That's to deal with the Custode and Stampede matchup. And the cyclic squad gave me that extra damage too, and they'll be the ones being thrown out. to get the angles with the high mobility to shoot custodes or whatnot behind ruins, which I couldn't quite get to with my indirect shooting.
Yep.
So yeah, there's a lot of mobility, and the choices are there for a reason with the meta in mind, rather than I'll just throw all the best things that I can in the list. There's obviously certain things that I've picked, like I even took velocity trackers on the one of the crisis units just because I knew they were the ones potentially hunting for custode bikes, etc.
All right. Does the list play aggressively, or do you sort of prefer to play defensively? Is it tailored to your play style, or do you tailor the gameplay to your opponent more?
So I've always played Tau as a gunline. Even back in 7th or 8th when Triple Riptides was about, I was the one using 9 broadsides. So I've always used it as a sit back, shoot for a bit, and then start pressuring your opponent. And with the new crisis suits, it means you can do that early on rather than sort of turn 3 or 4. You can start moving up sort of turn 2 or 3. Especially with Montcar giving the whole army advance and shoot whilst counting as stationary. So my turn ones tend to be quite passive because I want to, especially if I go first, I want to see what my opponent does, but I also want to alpha strike, hence with all the indirect firepower. Once I know sort of where everything's deployed, where they're going to start moving, where the objectives are, obviously, once we've deployed the terrain, which is quite important actually to mention, this was all player placed terrain.
Right.
Which we can go into in a bit. It means that I can play quite aggressive as soon as I've dealt the sort of hard-hitting blow of my turn 1 and 2. That's when I start just throwing my crisis units forward with fire and fade and with the speed that they have. So yeah, I do play it quite aggressive from sort of turn 2 onwards.
Okay. And maybe last question about the list, and then we will move on to the tournament itself and your games. How does this army play to the objective game? So is it easy for you to pick secondaries? Do you
Yes.
go into each? Okay, all right. So tell us about it.
Yeah, so right from the beginning, I have 3 preset secondaries, and then anything else is dependent on my opponent. So I've designed it to play return no, it's not Octarius.
Retrieve Necron
Retrieve
data.
Necron data, that's the one.
R&D.
Last stand and either engage or stranglehold. So the way I've done that is with little specific choices, which I actually do want to make minor adjustments to my list to deal with it. But yeah, so I'll go with the last stand. So initially, I took an stim injector on the cyclic ion crisis unit because I thought, well, this unit's the one that I'm going to throw forward. They're going to put a lot of pressure on my opponent. I need them to be a bit more durable, and the stim injector is fantastic for that. It basically, as soon as you take a wound, you get a 4+ feel no pain for the rest of the I believe it's phase on that model. Which is brilliant. You know, it just reduces a lot of damage. Mix that in with the savior protocol to put a wound on a drone, kill the drone off. It makes a unit very durable along with their shield drones. But what I found was that it meant that my last stand became them, and they're the ones sort of pushing up. So I moved it onto my airburst unit, which meant they were the ones, although hidden, just meant they were the most expensive unit. So they became my last stand, and also the 2 broadsides. So those 3 are super tough to kill. I think I only lost 1 out of the 3 in one of my 7 games. So I always had at least 10 points because people just, by the time I'd shot them turn 1 and 2, they didn't have a way of dealing with them reliably by that point. Because, you know, you've got all the shield drones, their toughness 5-8 wounds on the broadsides, they're 4 wounds each on the crisis units. You could fire and fade away. You know, there's a lot of durability in the army. The retrieval was quite simple to get because of the 2 units of Vespid. So the reason I added them, they're both 6-man units, is literally just to get me that and engage, but mostly that. By the time they drop in, turn 2 and 3, again, my opponents either having to press forward to sort of get the middle objectives because I've killed the stuff that's initially on there, which means there's more space at the back of the field, and he can't really afford leaving units to block out. So I pretty much always got it. The other great thing is the ethereal has an ability to give to a core unit, the capability of shooting and doing after doing an action. So you can do that in your own side of the board with a crisis unit, for example. You can move them. Sorry, you can shoot them and still having completed an action is fantastic.
Yeah, it's important.
I don't know why the ethereal can do that, but he can. And then the third one, engage. The Kroot and the Kroot Hound unit always press up. So they're pretty much the units giving me engage turn 1. And the Kroot Hound unit I specifically added literally just to get me engage for 2 points turn 1, because it can pregame move 7 and then move 12, and it's 24 points.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's so good. Initially I was taking a Piranha to do it, but it's like, what, 60 points, and the Kroot Hounds do it for the exact same thing but for 24 points. And after the tournament, I really want to take 2 or 3 units of them because they're so good.
Yeah, makes sense completely. All right, so let's look at the tournament itself. So was there anything specific about the formula, or was it just your stock standard 2K points tournament? Or were there any house rules? Or yeah, you've mentioned player place terrain. So how does that change the environment?
Sure. So player place terrain, I've never done before. That was the first time. But after the first 2 games, I kind of got the hang of it. It's very impactful, very impactful. I wouldn't say it's a bad thing or a great thing. It's sort of in between. From a competitive standpoint, I don't think it's the best. Because of like literally things I was doing, which was putting all the big pieces of terrain right at the back and the little pieces at angles so that if my opponent moves into them, I can shoot them. Or for example, one I saw was Manny Chima with his Stampede. He would put 1 ruin forward and the rest all the way back so that his big creatures can't be sort of blocked. And the 1 ruin was for his hive guard. So, it's, to me, it's very abusable. But on the other hand, from a tournament organizer's perspective and, rocking up to each table, it's very easy to just go, right, here's the deployment, here's the objectives positioning because they're preset, and right, sort out the terrain. And you just sort of get on with it. It does quicken things up, which is nice. Rather than having a map which you draw from with the positioning of each terrain piece, or even fixed terrain on every table being the exact same, gets a little bit boring. So it is nice to have something different. Is it abusable? Potentially. It definitely was in some of my games. But yeah, I think that was the biggest standout. The tournament itself did house rule a few things, namely for Tau, things like you can't bodyguard long strike, you can't advance and do an action even though you've got Montcar, or move even, so you couldn't have Storm Surges do their action to reroll all hits and be able to move and get the full rerolls. So there was a few sort of house rules like that. The custodes.
Would you say that those? Yeah, sorry, I think I cut out for a sec.
Yeah.
So do you think that those house rules, especially for you as a Tau player, that they were a little bit premature? I mean, the codex is pretty fresh, and I don't think that we've seen any Tau results before that tournament. So was that the preemptive ruling, or was it a just decision?
I agree with the decisions. I think there's some things which are like, this is a bit too strong. Like having a 14 wound tank, be able to not be targeted. Yeah, seems a bit insane. I know we're used to the Iron Hand Dreadnought, but this is like next level, I think. So I actually agree with that. The other thing with the Montcar not allowing actions, that's a very big gray area because the way it's written, you can. And I don't. It's difficult to tell whether GW wanted that to give Tau a lot of maneuverability, which they never had before, or maybe too much. So I don't know. I don't know. But I agreed with everything. There's no complaints from any player. I think overall Tau is still strong. And I do think that those in the future will need to be implemented, because I don't think Tau, if anything, need a buff. I think they do need a little bit toning down with those things in place.
All right. So you did say what the meta was like before you entered the tournament, and which armies potentially could be a threat. Were there any specific players that you knew that were going that you potentially, for example, wouldn't like to face off immediately or something like that?
Yeah, sure. Obviously, the players that stand out for me, a teammate of mine, Manny Chima, a fantastic player. I've played him numerous times. Always gives me a tough game, whatever list he uses. Malik as well. I've played him. I think. Well, the last time I played him, that was not a game, but we have had good games before. I'd say Vic, VJ, who was also using Tau, definitely a top player. Alex Petford, another quality player, was also taking Tau. I think it was just a case of testing out the new Tau. Everyone was a bit excited. Who else was there? Boris Michev was taking GSC. So I hadn't had much practice against GSC, so I don't really know what they do. So yeah, there was definitely a few others there as well. Stephen Box, Ben Jones. I won't go through all of them, but yeah, there was a good sort of overall amount of players which I knew I'd have a tough game against, that were going.
Yeah, so I just wanted to highlight that, because we did talk about some tournaments on our podcast, some tournaments that took place in the UK. I think we spoke about Nottingham and so on, and some lists that got to the final that we were surprised by here in Poland. And then when we looked at the list of people who attended, well, there weren't any big names, probably because they were at other tournaments. So we were looking for explanation of why certain lists made it to the top 5, for example, or top 10. Here sounds like a Shark Tank. Sounds like an event full of great players.
Yeah, I'd say the event had a number of top players. I wouldn't say it was the most competitive. We actually have an event early next month called War of the Roses, which is a bit of WTC funding and practice, and that's a Shark Tank. That's like 60% of the field could win that event, kind of Shark Tank. So that's going to be a fun event.
Okay, so we will have our eyes peeled on that. Still, let's stick to the Beachhead Brawl.
Sure.
And yeah, 7 games per player, so to say. Tell us about your games a little bit. Tell us how they went, who you faced, what armies you faced, and what your tactics was.
Okay, I'm gonna have to go by memory here, but my first game I ended up playing Custodes. Literally first game was a meta army, 9 bikes, the plate captain that can teleport, a couple of guard units. I don't remember exactly what it was. And this was my first time obviously using the deployed terrain, player placed terrain, sorry. And that's where I realized how strong Tau can be in that case. I managed to basically just get really good firing angles on his bikes from the get-go, and I killed 5 on turn 1. So that was that was really rough for him. So from that point, it was just a case of just wiping out the rest of his army. And obviously that was the first time actually playing Tau on the tabletop, so it was quite exciting. My second game, Crusher Stampede, so things are like going as expected.
Pretty much.
Yeah, I managed to go second here, which was really good because we both deployed really defensively. So he then obviously had to move up to basically redeploy and pressure me. But again, player placed terrain meant that he had like no terrain to hide behind with his big creatures, and this is where Long Strike does what Long Strike does best, which is pretty much, I'd say, half shot a big creature. He does like 10 to 11 wounds almost 90% of the time.
Wow.
Having a reroll to hit on wound and +1 to hit, +1 to wound against monsters and vehicles. So yeah, the chances are really high with a reroll to hit and reroll wound. You're going to do 10 to 12 damage on that thing, and then just finish it off with all the rest of your weapons. So I think I killed a Haruspex, a what do you call it, a Scythed Hierodule, and 4 of his Hive Guard on turn 1. I think I
That's
also killed
insane. That's
3
half his army.
warriors. Yeah, well, by turn 2 we called it because I killed way too much. They couldn't do anything after that.
Mm-hmm.
My game. So that was that game. My game 3. I think that was my first Jakari. I think I ended up playing Jakari 3 times or 2 times. Oh God, I can't remember my game 3. I think it was game 4. I played Jakari, and that was again the biggest issue I was facing was the speed of Jakari. It's always scary, and I didn't want anything to get sort of locked in combat, especially with witches. But that's where I found SMS just decimate units. Absolute insane against Jakari. The strength 5 is amazing. You're wounding even racks on 4s, meaning that you're just removing models which he can't just hide from. And I think this list alone that I took will definitely shake our meta in making people take transports, because not many people at the moment are, everything's on foot. Oh, I remember my last game now. It was Sisters of Battle, and
Okay.
that was your typical Sisters, triple Meltorettes. You've got Morvenval, Celestine, and the big 10-man unit of Sacrosants.
All the good stuff.
Yeah, all the good stuff. And that was a big eye opener on how I can deal with bodyguard. You just kill them, even if they're behind a wall. So yeah, I think I removed 9 of his bodyguard, and then proceeded to shoot his what are the girls that come with Celestine called?
Uh,
I can't remember what they're called, but her 2 bodyguards basically. I killed them, and then she was sat there in the open. So Longstrike decided to shoot his big cannon right in her face, one shot her. She then came back alive, charged my crisis unit, which I think I lost like 2 drones to. Left combat, and then Longstrike was like, right, let's try again. Shot her again, straight to the face, poor girl. And she was gone. She was taken right off the board.
Gemini Superior. Now I remember.
That's the one. Gemini
Yeah.
Superior. Yeah, so Longstrike has a massive tally, by the way. He's killed Drazar as well. So yeah, he did a lot of good work. Oh, he killed a Swarm Lord as well. That was it. So any special characters out there should be worried.
Yeah, especially he ignores invulnerable saves. So basically, just don't run in the open, and otherwise you're gone.
Even with bodyguard behind that wall, I'll be able to deal with it. Yeah. So he although I was only taking Longstrike for buffs, which I'll go into in a moment. He did kill anything he looked at, which was great to see. Yeah. Then. So that was sort of my first 4 games. Going into the next day, I played a Chaos Thousand Suns list. Chris Woods, I think, was his name. Really good player. He had a really tricksy list, and it wasn't really meta. He had 2 Helldrakes, 2 of those not Mauler Fiends, the shooty versions.
Forge Fiends.
Yes. He had 2 Forge Fiends. And then he had a large brick of Terminators. I think he had 2 or 3 characters, and then a couple more squads of Rubrics, 2 or 3 squads of Rubrics, a couple of Spawn. So looking at it, I was like, how is this doing really well? But I could see like how it's good in Thousand Suns. Things like the Forge Fiend can have buffs. They hit on 3s. The Helldrakes are super annoying because they get all this +1 to hit and damage or whatnot against fly. So I was like, well, half my army flies, so I'm a bit scared of that.
Yeah, it sounds like a Swiss Army knife.
Yeah, it's sort of got a bit of everything. But when it came to, first turn, I thought that was quite important. And it was in the end, because if he went first, I felt like with the mission we were playing, I think it's cool. I might have changed now. It used to be called Vital Intelligence with the six objectives, and four goes sort of across the center of the board. He could have put a lot of pressure. He had a lot of redeploying, a lot of teleporting. Especially one with the psychic power, so he could like smite off my crew and then redeploy a unit of 10 Terminators fully buffed in front of me. And Thousand Suns are actually really annoying for me because they get +1 save if you have -1. Sorry, if you do 1 damage, which is a lot of my shots. So they're very durable. So I was a bit actually nervous going into this game. But it turns out that if you go first and you can see the wings of Helldrakes, those two sort of disappear, which helped a lot. So that put a lot of pressure off turn one. I also managed to kill a unit of Rubric Marines, I believe, turn one as well. So it just meant that his sort of speed and pressure was reduced dramatically by me going first. What I do with my crew in most games is, if I believe that my opponent has a lot of deep strike, redeploying, or pre-game moves, I use my crew like a unit of scouts or incursors. They basically just go forward, spread out, and block out a lot of the board. And it's great value for the 60 points you spend on them. So I recommend any Tau player that's looking at taking Tau in general should always start their list with 2 or 3 units of crew. They're brilliant. And yeah, after that, he did try to play the mission quite well, but by my third shooting phase, he literally just had his characters and 10 Terminators left. He just couldn't hide his army from my mobility, which crisis suits now do really well. They can move 10 inches. You could auto advance them 6 with a stratagem, allowing them to stay stationary so they shoot as normal. And once I get within that 12-inch range, especially on turn 2 and 9-inch range turn 3, getting that extra AP helps massively against Thousand Suns. So actually in this game, I ran towards him, which he was quite surprised. Obviously within reason, I was using my flanks and stuff and terrain, but I was moving up close and personal because that's what I wanted to be. I couldn't just sit back and shoot him with -1 AP and 1 damage because he gets an additional save. So he basically ignores it. So even 5 Rubric Marines in terrain is super hard for me to shift. But as soon as I got the extra AP, you also have a strat to gain another AP from 2 units shooting the same target with an 18. That's how you deal with Thousand Suns, is just stack that AP, put your high damage shots in, and yeah, that was basically the game from turn 3.
Yeah, I wanted to ask where if there was ever any moment where you were afraid of his psychic phase, for example. But it sounds like he didn't even get to cast some of the spells because you just removed the units that potentially could do that.
Yeah, it doesn't sound that interactive, does it? But the thing is, if he went first and could actually put a bit of pressure on me with the Helldrakes and the redeploying, potentially yes, because as soon as the Kroot die, I don't have a way of stopping the smites. Apart from, I do have an Ethereal which gives a 5+ Feel No Pain. The issue with that is like your drones just die, and your crisis suits get the 5+ Feel No Pain. But once he kills the drones, that's when he could then potentially shoot and charge, etc. And that's sort of how he could have gone about killing my army. But unfortunately just didn't get into the position. But yeah, I'd say Thousand Suns do actually have some options of dealing with Tau. Maybe that list wasn't as optimized as it could have been against me. But obviously he did quite well. I think he ended up on a 1 loss and a draw, and then the rest wins. So he did quite well, the list.
So
yeah.
I'll take this moment to ask the question that I wanted to ask a little bit later, but maybe this is the right time to do it as well. Would you say that the surprise factor comes from Tau being a new codex might have helped you in this tournament?
100%. Yeah. 100%.
Right. So people were not really prepared.
Well, yeah, I think it's the same for any new codex. Like you sort of get those players that test everything, and then you get those that will only test the armies they're interested in, and then you get those that just wait until I don't know, the players that build the meta or whatnot. And then okay, for the next tournament, I've got to be aware of this, this, and this. I think for this tournament being so close to the Tau Codex release, not many people were aware of what the lists that will come out and what Tau do. A lot of games I spent explaining the process of my army, the buffs it gets, the stratagems, all this stuff. I had to keep reminding people that my battle suits have a stratagem to -2 their charge distance, which for me is amazing value. It's a really strong strat that I used all the time, but just the threat of it alone really puts players off. So things like, when you're explaining Tau and people like trying to take all the information in, that's a lot of pressure to put on a player on top of them trying to play a good game. You've got them thinking, right, I've got to be aware of this, this, and this. They've got a lot of ignorant sight shooting. They've got this direct shooting as well. They could leave combat and shoot. It sounds like, oh my god, this is broken, but Tau can be dealt with. It's just people haven't had enough time to prepare not only themselves but their lists.
Yeah, so it's going to be interesting, as you mentioned, how it's going to affect the meta in the future. Maybe more transports, or we'll see how people adapt, how the meta adapts. But still, we are left with 2 more games, I think, that you had to play on that Sunday.
Sure, yeah. I actually think that Sunday was double Jakari. I think I played 2 guys who actually were on the same sort of team. Paulie and what was his name? I can't remember his first name, but his surname was Makolo. Both good guys, really nice guys, good players, top sports. They took the games well, but both games were really tough for them. George, that was it. Yeah, George. So I'll explain my game with Paulie first. Paulie had quite a mixed Jakari list. What you'd sort of expect from an old school Drakari list, not sort of the new ones. Couple of Raiders, couple of Ravagers, Drazar, the combat succubus with all the buffs, a big unit of Rax, a unit of Grotesques, a couple of units of Incubi, a bit of everything really, Trueborn, etc., etc. And he went first, which actually was really good for me because it meant that he couldn't sort of react to what I was going to do by playing defensive and then jump on objectives later on. We were playing quite a Dawn of War mission, one of the new ones. Sorry, I don't know all the names. The 2 objectives where they're sort of in an L shaped in the your side of the territory and 2 on theirs, and then 1 in your deployment zone, so that's 6. And this is one of the games I actually took Stranglehold because I knew that I could hold my 3 and just shoot him off 1. All of his objectives were hidden, but he just didn't have the durability needed against all that SMS and airburst firepower. And that just shows where, what I was saying with the transports, where if he went in a more MSU approach with Venoms, which are -1 to hit, that would become a lot more difficult for my list to deal with. And having like small units of 5 where sure, if you blow them off, whatever, they've done their job, would be a bit easier for him. But he had big units, important characters that were getting flung out just to kill some drones or wipe unit recruit off, which he had to do, but it meant that he couldn't hit the juicy stuff. So I think by turn 3 we called it because he ran out of juice. He ran out of stuff that he was throwing at me onto objectives. And yeah, I believe that old school Jakari do not stand a chance unless they're like all in transports or all in like Venoms, because Venoms have a -1 to hit in 8, which is really strong. Even Raiders, as long as you can hide them, but plays terrain, he's not going to hide them outside his deployment zone, unfortunately. So yeah, that was really tough for him. The same sort of thing happened against George. He had a big unit of Hellions. He had Drazar, he had a big unit of Rax, Grotesques. And I actually said to George, like, a few hours before our game because he asked, how I'm getting on against Jakari, and I said to him, it seems quite a uphill battle for Jakari. And he said, well, what can the Jakari player do? And I said, well, the only thing I do as a Jakari player is play quite aggressive, throw everything forward, try and get some charges off, lock stuff in combat. Because as soon as I get the board pressure against the Jakari that's trying to play defensive, I'm going to win. So in our game, we obviously ended up playing, and I think he took that in mind. Unfortunately, he went second, which meant he lost a whole unit of 10 Hellions turn one, and I killed a Raider, which massively reduced his maneuverability. So he actually did something quite interesting, which I wasn't expecting. He moved both his other Raiders full of stuff, Drazar, Succubus, etc., and he went for a charge. And this is where my dice went a bit ham. So he charged one Raider into a crisis unit. So I was like, well, I've got a load of CPs. I'll overwatch. And they had double airburst and a plasma guns. The plasma guns, I think, one hit and caused three damage. So I was like, okay, that's a good start.
Mhm.
And then the airburst shot. So the airburst shot, they had a buff from long strike, which gives them 6s to hit, auto wound. And I thought it only lasts for the shrink phase. It actually lasts until your next turn. So I I ended up shooting these airbursts. I got something stupid like 46 shots with 10d6, and I proceeded to roll 14 sixes and all that, which I
Ouch.
think it's slightly over the average. Actually, it's a lot over average. I think the average is like 8 or 9. I rolled something crazy like 14 or 15, and with the -1, he only has like what, a 5-up save, 5-up. I think even a 6-up. I don't even know if you get you're invulnerable. Either way, I only needed to cause 7 wounds, and his Raider proceeded to die on Overwatch.
Well, Raiders aren't really the toughest of units.
No, no, but I wasn't expecting to kill it. I thought I'll just put a few wounds on it just to deal with it later. And obviously, what that meant was 2 units of Incubi and Drazar was left in the open because they then couldn't charge. And yeah, that was really rough. The other one did get its charge off and sort of wrapped around the side of my army. But because now one was open, the other one I felt really, that was easy to deal with. The crisis commander, and one of the reasons why I take him, gave the other unit the ability to leave combat and shoot. So they left, went on the other side. My broadsides then ran up, and I basically wrapped this raider, even with a 6-inch emergency disembark, so he couldn't get anything out. Obviously, proceeded to kill it. Everything inside died. I then turned on to Drazar and his little contingent, and I proceeded to kill all his contingent. And of course, Long Strike, the hero of the day, decided to shoot Drazar to the face.
Yeah. This is where your motivation as a Tau opponent just, drops completely.
Yeah, literally. Yeah, George was like pretty demoralized at that point, and again, I think we called the game because, all his damage output had gone. I feel bad for George. George, the way the rankings worked, the pairings worked was, the winners play the winners, and then it goes down to randomized on who you play. So in our case, there was 3 players on 6-0. So Manny and Vic ended up playing, and it was all random on BCP. And then I was paired against the sort of player with a draw, but there were no players with a draw. I think there were only players below with a loss. Unless it was a draw, I'm not too sure. But I think there was like 9 of them to choose from, and I randomized against George. I'm pretty sure he wasn't happy with that because obviously he knew Jakari going into to Tau would have been tough. So yeah, it was a top sport though. He took it well, and he definitely, I think, at least took something from it in that he needs to adapt his list and his tactics against Tau in the future.
Yeah, win some, lose some. It's, at least he experienced that firsthand. He will know what to do in the next game, maybe.
Yeah, and one thing I just want to add, because I'm sure people will be, wondering, oh, what would have happened if I played Vic with Tau or Manny with his Stampede? I was actually really confident going into both. My list deals with both really well. Me and Vic, well, I was teasing Vic all weekend saying I can't wait to have our Tau off. because he knew that my Tau list could beat his. My list was more refined than his, especially in the Tau off. And then my game into Manny would have definitely come down to first turn. But I know from Manny's game with Vic, he rolled a 2 and I rolled a 5. So I would have gone first. So it's fine.
Okay, so yeah, congrats on those games. Sounds like a great feat to defeat all those players, and in a quite dominant fashion as well. Now, from time perspective, a couple days have passed. You probably had the time to think about the list. Is there anything in your list that you didn't particularly like? Anything that you would, erase, replace with something else, or is it a perfect sort of puzzle? All pieces fit together perfectly. You're not going to touch it and just take it to the next tournament in that shape and form.
So I managed to obviously refine the list to get to that sort of stage by practicing. Now I've had 7 games with it. I wouldn't say it's perfect, but it's, for me, it's very close to being what I would want from the Tau list. When I consider secondaries, I would definitely want 1 or 2 more units of Kroot Hounds, maybe another unit of Kroot themselves. Would I change the loadouts of my Crisis? Probably not. They are literally just gonna only change depending on the meta. And the HQ choices were solid. So the only thing really which I wasn't too fussed about was having 2 units of 3 broadsides. If anything, I could drop 1 and make 1 unit of 3 and 2 units of 1. That would be sort of a fine change to sort of give me the points to add these little additions to help me with the missions. That does, however, make me lose last stand on them, but then the other unit crisis suits can become that, and I know they're just as durable. Okay, not as durable, but they are still fairly
Quite
durable.
durable, yeah.
Quite durable, yeah. I don't think the list would change too much. I do still want to test like the devilfish with breaches inside, because those are great objective grabbers and great midfield presence, but I think that's just a complete different list. I think if you're going to do the broadsides and play the shooting game, you may as well stick with them and take as many as you can. I also think it depends on the terrain. If I was to play on WTC terrain, I probably wouldn't take 6 broadsides, and I'd probably change the list to far sight, because I feel like the game will be more up close and personal. I'd probably take more
Probably,
crisis
yeah.
suits,
Mm-hmm.
because crisis suits are just as dangerous, but just a bit closer range, and they can get angles very easily. So yeah, it will depend on the tournament I'm going to, what sort of terrain they have. That makes a big difference on the style of Tau list you play.
Mm-hmm.
But if I was to go to the exact same tournament again, setup, I don't think I would change too much.
All right. And tell me, or tell our listeners rather, having played 7 games with this army now, with this list, and having done some preparation before the tournament as well, does Tau have any soft spots? Is there anything that you could advise people playing against Tau, not only yourself, but Tau in general, that they could or should do in order to, somehow handle this army? Is it play to the mission more, or charge as fast as possible? What would be your sort of advice for all the people facing Tau right now?
Yeah, sure. So obviously, I won't go through each individual army,
Yeah,
because
of
that could
course.
take all day. But just the general tips I would recommend when building a list, if you believe that there's going to be either some top players with Tau, or just a general amount of Tau there. One thing I definitely recommend is some form of -1s to hit. Whether that be an aura ability, like Custodes have the banner guy, or it be like a psychic power to just give a unit -1 to hit. That's super powerful against Tau, because Tau want all these buffs on one unit, and if you just make that unit -1 to hit, then you're reducing the amount of damage that they can do. Yes, they can get +1 to hit, through marker lights
Hmm.
or whatnot, but then their output is dramatically decreased by hitting on 4s rather than 3s, for example. So any ways of getting -1 to hit, take it, especially now. That works against other armies as well. It's still useful. It's a still useful mechanic. Dark Angels have that speeder that get the little speeder thing that gives an aura of -1 to hit. That's super annoying. So just little things like that will make a massive difference. Another thing is, if you genuinely believe that you're just going to lose if you just hide behind terrain, for example, deploy your army on the line. Literally deploy your army on the line and just try and go first. I know that doesn't sound like a great strategy, but it will at least allow you to win the game if you go first, or potentially win the game going first. I'll give you an example. Blood Angels, right? If you're playing Blood Angels and you have loads of Sanguinary Guard and Vanguard, if you're just going to play reserved and you end up going first and you're not really going to pressure anything apart from moving up a little bit, you're still going to get shot off the board because now you're in range of everything. Tau have an ability to get full rerolls to wound if you're within 12. So it's going to happen either way. Whereas if you just throw your whole army forward and you put a lot of pressure, yes, you will still lose quite a bit, but you're at least sort of hitting them back.
You'll put up a fight at least.
Yeah, I'm not saying that's the best strategy to do in it all the time. Another thing is deep striking. If you have a really good way of outflanking or deep striking, getting angles, utilize it. One of the Sisters players I played in game 3 or 4, he cleverly put his Retributors in reserve, outflanked them, and when they came on, they did a lot of damage. They were quite scary. They kept me back a bit because I didn't want to overcommit. Yes, I have shield drones, but the multi-melter Rets do have a lot of shots. So if they do pop off, they're going to do a lot of damage to my crisis suits. So knowing that, pardon me, it makes me play a bit more reserved. Deep striking as well, you need to be careful because if you're relying on a deep strike to charge a crisis unit, remember they have -2 to charge. So if you are going to charge something out of reserve or deep strike, make sure that it either has a lot of bonuses to charge, such as the chaplain's +2 to charge, or it has a way of ignoring modifiers to charge, because otherwise you're just going to be stood there in the open and you will get caught out. So that's definitely something to be aware of. Don't bother trying to win a shooting matchup. I don't think any army in the game, considering AdMech took a lot of nerfs, can... Well, actually saying that, AdMech are probably the only army that could potentially put up a fight. But because most of their damage comes from big units of Rangers, well, guess what? Airbursts are blast, and they're going to love that. So that won't work. So yeah, things like transports as well. Having like a basic, just as an example, like a Rhino or a Wave Serpent is really annoying behind a wall to deal with, like that's actually hidden. Bring your transports out. You don't have to have a whole army of transports, but just a couple. Anything toughness 6 and above that can hide, that's small, things like that. That have an innate -1 to hit, like a Venom. That's super annoying for Tau to deal with, because they don't have any way of taking you out of that hole that you're in, because they don't have any combat. So once you've dug in behind that objective with a small vehicle, it's super tough. Custos do that really well with their bikes. Their toughness 6, 5 wounds. They switch off rerolls. So Custos are naturally a very good answer to Tau if you play KG and put a lot of pressure on the flank with a fully buffed up Custode unit. Is very tough for Tau. So yeah, every army has their own ways of dealing with it. I'm not saying that means every army does have a way of dealing with it. Because if you do build just to deal with Tau and then you end up playing like Crusher Stampede, which is all combat, it kind of backfires.
Yeah, it will bite you in the ass.
Yeah, which is why I actually think the current meta right now is the best it's been in a while, because it's not just all, if I go first, I shoot off the board. It's a bit of variety. You've got Custos, Tyranids, Tau, Drakari still good. That at least there's a few armies up there. Even Deathwatch are a very strong army, which a lot of people are sitting on. I've used Deathwatch before. We've got a top player, Michael Costello, who I think came 6th at this event. His list is really strong, and scares the hell out of me, because he can put himself in White Scar Doctrine and just advance and charge with his whole army. which has an insane threat range because of the biker and jump pack guy in the squad of Deathwatch. So
Yeah.
there's lots of armies that can actually deal with Tau. Obviously, I was lucky to dodge some of them. So don't expect Tau to just sit there and shoot, especially have some terrain. But you've definitely got to consider them now as a threat in the meta.
Do you expect, with everything that is going on, with everything that GW is doing and have announced, so the data slates or balancing patches coming out on a quarterly basis, and then chapter approved and so on, all those things, do you expect that Tau is going to get hit by any of those anytime soon?
100%. 100%. I only because, like, although it may not hit my list right now, I think there's certain things in the Tau Codex that will be hit, i.e., whether it be in the FAQ or a future update. I think broadsides having the core keyword will probably end up losing it, the same as the chickens for AdMech. Not that I want them to lose the core keyword, but I wouldn't be surprised if they did. A lot of people, at least on TTS right now, are playing 9 broadsides, and it's very obnoxious. So a lot of people are just like, well, what's the point in playing? You've got these 9 broadsides. One has a free marker light, the other gets 4 rerolls to hit from Shadow Sun. Like it's super tough to deal with. I don't think that's an optimized list, mind you, but you're going to see that quite often. And because of that, I think you're going to end up getting nerfed. Anything that's obnoxious. But saying that, I think we've got to wait until it affects the American meta, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
As soon as something big happens there, that's usually when we see change. If it was down to us and the EU meta, things would get changed a lot quicker rather than 6 months later.
Yeah, but for now, I understand. I don't know if you're going to WTC this year, but if yes, potentially Tau, one of the top 8 armies right now, right?
Right now, yeah, 100%. Well, if I was going to WTC, which is likely, hopefully, maybe, for Team England, I would want to play Tau. Not just because they're really strong, but I really like Tau. Like, they're one of my favorite armies. So, yeah, I think if it was a top 8 list right this second, then I'm pretty sure, yeah, Tau would definitely make it. I don't think it would be the style of list I'm using, because this list is designed for singles meta. But yeah, you'll definitely see a more quirky version, probably more crisis suits, devilfish, etc. to play the mission. But yeah, I think Tau is strong enough for the top 8.
Yeah, especially that at the WTC, you can somehow influence the choice of the table, so you can get to play on an open table with Tau. That's a dream come true.
Yeah, their open tables aren't necessarily open, but
you
yeah,
can shoot through them.
Exactly, yeah. So if you manage to get one of those with, say, a list like mine, then yeah, you're laughing then.
All right. So yeah, fingers crossed that the event happens. Fingers crossed that COVID goes away, and also fingers crossed that all the players that don't play Tau finally learn how to do that. We'll see what happens, because soon we'll see the Eldar Codex come out. Shortly afterwards, there will be the Tyranids Codex that I am very eagerly looking forward to. And yeah, that those two could or will definitely shake up the meta. So we'll see where Tau ends up after those two come out.
They
Listen,
definitely
I
will.
think, yeah, no doubt about it. They always do. So, all right, Alex, thanks for coming on. Do you want to plug anything? Do you, are you part of any teams, any podcasts, anything, or should we just wrap it up?
I'm good to plug anything. I just want to say thanks for having me on, and I just want to say a big shout out to all the sort of Polish community. You guys are awesome. You really are. Like the Polish guys and the Polish team, their sound. I have a really good time whenever I see them at the WTC. Really top players, and I'm looking forward to seeing them soon, hopefully.
If you're active on TTS, they might, have a spar with you or something. I know that the Polish national team is now sparring quite a lot on TTS just to prepare for the WTC. So if you want to get some action with the Polish national team, get in touch with them. TTS is the way to go.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that sounds good. I might have to look at that. But yeah, definitely at some point.
Yeah, good practice. All right, dude, thanks for all the information. That was very thorough, very informative. Hopefully, we can get you back on the podcast at some point, probably after another victory or at least top spot at the tournament.
Hopefully.
It was a pleasure to have you. Thanks a lot for joining us for this episode.
Thank you very much. Cheers for having me.
And to all our listeners, make sure that you like and subscribe us on YouTube and all the social media. This helps us grow. This helps make the podcast bigger. This increases our reach. So we really count on your help with this. If you want more interesting, top quality content, then help us grow and we'll try to deliver. Thank you, everyone. And until next time, bye bye.